Today was just another day in the House of Commons, with this exception. There has been some discussion, as Frank McGee said, regarding the flag. I'll be speaking about that in a little while. But you'll know something of the detail. Premier Smallwood of Newfoundland, he said only over his dead body would they do away with the flag on which there was a Union Jack. Now, after all, when the government heard that, they could not but be dismayed. And because after all, catastrophes of that kind cannot be tolerated. And they decided that they would produce a resolution on the flag. I go no further at this time in that regard, but to point out the resolution as it is. That flag is to go. That's the declaration of the Prime Minister of Canada and those surrounding him. But Joey said, no, and something had to be done. So they produced the following hybrid resolution: that the government be authorized to take such steps as may be necessary to establish officially as the flag of Canada a flag embodying, and I'm leaving out a few words, 3 maple leaves conjoined on one stem in colors red and white, the red leaves occupying a field of white between vertical sections of blue on the edges of the flag, and also to provide that the Royal Union flag, generally known as the Union Jack, may continue to be flown as a symbol of Canadian membership in the Commonwealth of Nations and of our allegiance to the Crown. Out with a Red Ensign. In with the 3 maple leaves. Those maple leaves being the choice, the favorite choice, the ultimate choice of the Prime Minister. But because of the fact that Mr. Smallwood had some doubts about this that he expressed, it was decided not to entirely remove the Union Jack, but to have it in substitution as a kind of alternative. Well, I can see that you appreciate poetry too. Well, these have been some of the things that have interested us in the last few weeks. Tremendous problems facing Canada. I'm not going to relive the days of the 1962 and 1963 elections, but every stand that we took in the light of subsequent events, those that they criticize most strongly, they have adopted as their own. Investment down. They don't talk about unemployment now. Doesn't exist. Only 590,000 are now receiving unemployment benefits in the last figures available per month. They say it's sectional now. The picture changes every day to their detriment. Well, they had to find out some plan to get around this. And therein lies the explanation of the latest liberal political gimmick, the creation of the flag issue. They want a cloak for their errors a shield for their failures, and an escape from their responsibilities. So they produced the flag. And what a flag it is. I'm not going into a description of the flag controversy over the years, but I would remind you that are interested, that on November the 13th, 1945, this matter was before the House. They said they were going to produce a flag, a national flag. And then they produced a resolution with two flags. Do you remember what Mr. Pearson said in April 1963? That this was two nations? Two nations, two flags, two anthems. You can't build a Canada on the basis of that kind of duplicity. And we as a party believe in one Canada, the doctrine that was Macdonald's and all the successors. United Canada while maintaining the constitutional rights. Two flags. Well, there was a book written on that subject once. And Evelyn Waugh wrote a book, put up more flags. And I presume because there was that successful under two flags at Hollywood, Gary Cooper and Claudette Colbert, that the government decided what's good enough for Hollywood is good enough for Canada. Oh, it's a most unusual thing. And he flew this. He wonders how I found out. He went out to the Prime Minister's home for the weekend at Harrington Lake, and I found out because every pressman knew about it. And over on that flagstaff on the Prime Minister's home floated the three-leaf flag. I asked him about that. He said he didn't think it was any concern. He didn't think it was proper to bring a thing like that up. But he didn't answer me. And I followed up. I like to clarify the situation. And I asked him a number of other questions, and finally he said, well, I wanted to find out what it looked like. And why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I? Well, I said, what business have you as Prime Minister to fly this that has not yet received the support of Parliament? Well, he said, I want to see what it looked like. Can't you imagine that flagpole with the other 2,999 models that have been made? Sir, Mr. Saint Laurent said in 1945 in November, we're not, when we discuss a distinctive flag for Canada, we're not discussing a party flag. Wisdom. What happened? Mr. Pearson looked, he saw, he examined, he was convinced, he became enamored. He said, this is it. And then he went out to Winnipeg to the Royal Canadian Legion. If his reception had been warmer or cooler, as it were, than it was, he'd have said, you see, I convinced them. One doesn't go to a religious ceremony such as the Legion has every Sunday evening and the annual meeting to make political speeches. This was his flag. He told us in Parliament he really didn't have a flag in mind. And the very day he told us that, he had a group of safe newspapermen, not including the Star, a group of safe newspapermen out to the cozy privacy of the prime ministerial residence, and there he showed them his plan. Canadians, we in this party over the years have said we had no objection to a distinctive flag. But ladies and gentlemen, a flag that does not contain the greatness of your heritage is no flag for a nation any nation. Goes the coat of arms. Away goes the color. Goodbye to the Union Jack, accepting as another flag. How should it be gone about? I said to the Prime Minister this: a flag must represent the soul and the heart of a nation. It must be something that raises in one's being the pride of his nationhood. What about the Prime Minister's pennant? He got up in the House and he said, "This is it. Eureka! This is it." Now he said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a free vote." Well, I asked him what a free vote meant. And I found out what a free vote was, according to his interpretation. It meant this: you can vote as you want to, but if you don't vote in favor of the flag I want, then we'll have an election. You can just imagine the Liberal members lining up. You say, "Well, I'm all for the Red Ensign." But I guess not that I love the Red Ensign less, but 18,000 more. Oh. That's not the way. As a matter of fact, when you speak to this light just about went out. When I saw Mr. Pearson today rising and really laying the law down, I was reminded that 100 years ago tonight, Abraham Lincoln found that he was going to be opposed by a candidate who was generally believed would defeat him. Civil War was coming to an end. Abraham Lincoln always had a story to tell. Instead of getting into political controversy with this man who spoke powerfully and circumspectly and diplomatically, Lincoln told the story about the colored man in Springfield who was out riding to the neighboring town about 6 or 8 miles away. And he was telling Lincoln about it afterwards. And he said a frightful storm came up. Thunder and lightning. And I had to dismount from my horse, he said, and the only way I could lead the horse along the pathway was by the light and the flashes of the lightning. And then he said there was a tremendous boom. And I fell on my knees, and I had never been there for years. And he said, I decided to pray, and I said, Lord, if you just let me have a little more light and a little less noise, I'd get to my destination. Well, a little more light. Do you remember 2 weeks ago he was going to bring it in? Never going to carry it through? No stop. Right through with it. Well, today he got up in the House and said, not yet. He says, I'm thinking the thing over, and next week, at the end of next week, I'll bring it up. Threaten an election, and nobody trembled. Threatened his supporters by saying they had a free vote, providing they voted freely for him. You can't fight this kind of thing in an election campaign in which members are seeking re-election. What were we going to do on this question? They said it was indecision on my part because I dared to say no when they said let's set up a royal commission on biculturalism and bilingualism. I I said, you set up a royal commission, and you'll divide this country, and you'll have no decision when they finish sitting. Well, they've sat, I don't know, $700,000 or $800,000 worth now. And all across this nation there's division. What would we have done? Well...
Political parties. In the second of the 1964-65 series, the Right Honorable John G. Diefenbaker, leader of the opposition and national leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. He is interviewed by Jeff Scott of the Parliamentary Press Gallery.
Mr. Diefenbaker, the Commons Flag Committee has now completed its deliberations. Its report will be made public tomorrow. Advance indications are that it has not reached the virtual unanimity that you were insisting on earlier. What will your attitude be in the House if it's simply a majority?
The attitude that will be taken is that, taken by us throughout, namely that a flag is something that cannot be imposed on the people as a whole. It requires the support, generally, of all Canadians. It's because of that, and knowing that the government had no mandate from the people to bring in the type of flag that it's endeavored to bring about, we asked for a plebiscite of the Canadian people. If there is not virtual unanimity...
What does virtual unanimity mean, sir?
Well, I would say it would be 85 to 90%.
12 or 13 of the 15 members on the committee?
Oh, yes, it would require 13 members of the committee, I would say. Otherwise, we would be in this position, that the voice of that portion of the Canadian people who ask that the Red Ensign shall have a place, or at least that the Union Jack shall have a place on the flag, would be entirely denied. For you'd have the Liberal Party united against that. You'd have the NDP, with one or two exceptions, united against that. The Social Credit, with one or two exceptions, united against it. And the Crediste, united against it. In other words, you would have imposed on the Canadian people a flag simply because of the fact that the Liberal Party has been able to secure the necessary support from its allies, the third parties.
Well, now, sir, originally these members of the committee went into that committee in I think the expression you used was a free and untrammeled way.
That's right.
But all the reports that have been coming out and the speculation out of that committee so far have had at least 4 of the Conservatives against whatever has been decided in the committee. Is there any suggestion here of instruction from outside the committee?
No. The committee members, the Conservative Party, went into that committee completely free from instruction. Indeed, I've carried this so far that I've refrained from in any way going in to any possible recommendation that might be made.
Well, now let's discuss a couple of the recommendations which have been suggested.
Suggested by whom?
Oh, this has just been coming out of the committee in one way or another. Speculation, the last one had a flag with a single red maple leaf and 2 vertical red borders on either side. Now, would this be acceptable to you as a national flag?
Certainly it wouldn't. I'm not prejudging what the committee would do. If it was virtually unanimous on this, then I would have to reconsider the situation in the light of the statements that I've made. But certainly, we couldn't accept that type of a flag.
Well, that's not the government design. That isn't the 3 maple leaves.
Oh, no, but the government has been a government that will always take up a secondary position. Like Mr. Dooley, this government, and the manner in which it advances its policy is, this is our policy. If you don't like it and have other suggestions, we'd be glad to give them sympathetic consideration. But you mentioned that the recommendation may be a flag with a red maple leaf on a white background and 2 bars of red. Well, all I have to say about that, aside altogether from the fact that it would show nothing of our heritage, is that it would be far from being distinctive. As a matter of fact, it would be the Peruvian flag, almost entirely a replica, excepting that in one case you have a maple leaf, and in the case of the flag of Peru, it is a representation of some coat of arms. And at a distance of 100 yards, you wouldn't know which was which. If we ever get that flag, we'd have the Peruvians anyway saluting it.
Well, they make the same argument about the Red Ensign at this point, that you can't tell the difference between the Red Ensign at 100 yards and the flag of Bermuda, or one of the...
That's not so, though. I've never known anyone who wasn't able to identify our flag at any distance. At any distance.
Sir, does this mean that in the Commons we now go back to the original flag resolution and the original amendment about the plebiscite, in fact, the original debate?
Well, of course, that's what we expect. Although I've read that some of the liberal strategists feel that they'll simply have to move the adoption, a concurrence in the report, whatever it may be. And having done that, the discussion in Parliament will be limited. We'll see about that. Their hopes and expectations that they're going to be able to throttle Parliament may receive another jolt. You'll recall that when the government first introduced the flag, the Troika flag, the general understanding was it would be a matter of a few weeks. There'd be some objection raised, and then we would suddenly fold up our tents like the Arabs and silently steal away. And they found that we weren't taking that attitude. Then they decided that they would have it by the time that the Queen came. Well, then Mr. Pearson went still further when he said, after the committee was set up, that by Christmas he would have the flag. Well, his choice, or the choice of the Liberal Party. All I have to say is we have taken our stand as a party on behalf of a flag, distinctive flag, but one that shows our heritage, and that if the committee, by a simple majority or without it being virtually unanimous, comes up with a recommendation that that simply carrying out the agreement that was made in advance by various members of the parties that they didn't want the Red Ensign or the Union Jack on it, well then we're back to a situation in the House of Commons which can easily be solved. Simply let the Canadian people have the right to speak at the next general election on a plebiscite, and I'm sure Canadians as a whole will accept whatever the majority of Canadians as a whole desire.
Let's turn to the royal visit, Mr. Diefenbaker. As leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, how do you look back on earlier this month, good or bad for national unity?
During the months preceding her visit, I refrained from speaking because, after all, the Prime Minister is her advisor. I thought, having regard to the threats that were made in advance and to the gross uneasiness that had been aroused, that it was not appropriate that she should visit. In the light of subsequent events, I think that what took place cannot but be detrimental to Canadian unity. To bring Her Majesty here and to permit, or at least to have witnessed some of the things that took place and the reaction in some parts of our country is anything but acceptable to Canadians as a whole.
Once she was invited for a legitimate reason to celebrate the Charlottetown centennial, where then would you have stopped the visit? Would you?
Well, you can't separate a visit such as that. But I think that with conditions as they were, and these are not views I'm expressing after the event, I expressed them privately previously, that it was quite improper to place her in such an impossible position. By 1967, and time is a great healer, many of the difficulties of today may have been swept aside. In any event, there would have been a national reaction to her visit. The 100th anniversary, I feel that altogether it gave Canada a black eye internationally, and I hold responsible the government of Canada for this. It should have known better, having regard to all the circumstances.
Mr. Diefenbaker, you've been very critical of the federal-provincial decision immediately following the Queen's visit to repatriate the British North America Act. You've said that we can't afford to erect Berlin walls between the provinces.
Yes.
Do you think that this is the effect of that decision?
The provinces naturally would accept anything that the government of Canada would give that would denude the Parliament of Canada of its powers. What's happened here is going to be detrimental to Canada's future. Can't help it be. Now, I'm not going to quote from conservative papers, but I'm going to refer to two papers that give consistent support to the Liberal Party. One is the Toronto Star, and the Toronto Star says the agreement as it stands represents a triumph for provincial rights, for extreme provincial rights. And it goes on to say it will reduce the powers of the federal government to a minimum. It could be a milestone in the breakup of Confederation. And then the Winnipeg Free Press says this. It says, what has been done will bring about in our nation possibly the destruction of unity itself.
Well, let me ask you this, sir. Is this not what your government precisely recommended in 1961? Is this not the Fulton formula?
It's precisely not what our government recommended. We recommended the system, or a formula known as the Fulton formula, which he was the Attorney General and Minister of Justice and spoke for the government of Canada. But this formula takes a portion of the formula that we had and adds something else. It gives to the provinces the right to legislate on matters within the federal jurisdiction. It removes Section 91(1) of the British North America Act. In other words, when any one province in Canada can secure the support, and one of those provinces should be either Ontario or Quebec, of three others, and a favorable parliament, and it has today with the Liberal majority in both houses, it could actually legislate, any province could legislate on those matters, immigration, even monetary matters, tariffs and the like, legislate on them. And take the Indian situation, another one. All of these things it could take over. If this is carried into effect in its present form, I fear that it's going to balkanize Canada, and it's certainly going to achieve the wishes of the Premier of Quebec and also of Mr. Levesque for an associate state within Canada, establishment of the principle of a state within a state, something that is the entire denial of Confederation. And we in this party, the Conservative Party, the party of Confederation, will fight this to the limit to assure that we do not balkanize Canada and bring about an end to our federation as it is.
We have a few seconds left, sir. May I ask you this quick question? Are we going to have a flag by Christmas?
I don't know which Christmas you're referring to.
Thank you, Mr. Diefenbaker.
Broadcasts of conversations with Canadian political leaders. Tonight's program comes from the office of the Leader of the Opposition.
Directement du bureau du chef de l'opposition, la Société Radio-Canada présente sur l'ensemble de ses réseaux une émission spéciale. M. Diefenbaker s'entretient avec M. Norman Depoe, reporter politique de Radio-Canada, et Vincent Prince, rédacteur au journal La Presse.
Talking with Mr. Diefenbaker are Norman Depoe, CBC National Affairs reporter, and Vincent Prince of the editorial staff of the Montreal newspaper La Presse.
Mr. Diefenbaker, the other parties have accused you and your party of conducting a filibuster and perhaps having the intention to continue to filibuster on the flag debate. How do you see your position as opposition leader? Is there any time limit you would put on the right of the minority to delay or even stop what the majority desire to do?
I think the best way I can answer that is by referring to Sir Wilfrid Laurier. In the year 1912, during the course of the Navy debate, he pointed out that up to that date there had been 4 occasions in history, in Canadian history, since Confederation, where an opposition standing on a matter of importance to many of the people of Canada had finally been proven right. In 1885, in 1896, in 1910, and again in 1912. And as Sir Wilfrid said, there is only one way in which an opposition, speaking for a large number of Canadians, can express itself, and that is through the means of arguing to the limit. It's the only way, and as far as the 3 parties are concerned, the opposition parties are united with the government. And there's only one party which speaks for millions of Canadians. And the only way in which that voiceless millions can receive the proper consideration in Parliament is through an opposition that is prepared to take its stand, and that stand we've taken.
Vous avez dit, Monsieur Diefenbaker, que ce débat...
You have said, Mr. Diefenbaker, that this debate was unfortunate in that it was such as to bring about a division in public opinion in Canada, as to divide the Canadian people. Would you say that yourself, speaking as leader of the party, and that your colleagues have done nothing or said nothing that would embitter the debate and bring about a division of minds, this division which you fear?
Well, what you're asking me, in effect, is what our attitude has been. Divisive attitude? There has been no divisive attitude on our part. The divisive attitude arose because of the stand taken by the Prime Minister. He brought up a matter which he knew would divide Canada. During the course of his remarks last night, he admitted the division. Shouldn't have been brought in the way in which it was. It should have been presented to a committee to begin with, so that any determination that was made would be a determination based not on political considerations. We didn't create the division. The Prime Minister, by his attitude, did. Indeed, one of the members for Toronto, recently in the House of Commons said that this particular model of flag, the three leaves, or any model or design, had never been considered by caucus at any time before the first reference was made by the Prime Minister. It wasn't our party that brought about the division. As far as our attitude is concerned, we still believe and will continue to believe that matters that divide the nation ought not to be brought before the House in a spirit of partisanship. Our party has argued its case strongly. One has no control over the views expressed by individual members, and under no circumstances would I want to. But I point out this to you, Mr. Presse, and it's our party stands for the preservation of those things which are historic, which touch the heart. We believe that in this matter, had there been consideration given by the Prime Minister not to stubbornly pursuing to the stubborn pursuit of his course, but rather to uniting Canadians, we wouldn't have had this division. We didn't create the division. It was created by the Liberal Party in its attitude that it's taken. And you know, in your own paper, a few months ago, your paper stated that and I have the editorial here, and you've read it, no doubt. It said, symbol, yes, but of what? And then it goes on to say, in truth, it wasn't a flag that the Prime Minister was looking for. It was votes. And certainly, a flag that is to represent the past, the greatness of a country and its heritage, should not be born as a political thing. And that's the reason for the strong discussions that have taken place. The fact that the government of this country decided that it was going to cram down the throats of Canadians what it wanted for the sake, and again I quote your newspaper, for the sake of votes, regardless of the divisions that might be created.
Mr. Diefenbaker, now that the flag is before a committee, and you have said that you would like to see 80 to 90% of that committee, say 12 of the 15 members, in favor of a unified report before you would agree to a debate that was not, as you put it, free and untrammeled. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens if you don't get 12 members of that committee? Do we go back to another 6 weeks of debate, or even longer?
May I point out this fact to you, Mr. Depoe? I was the one who suggested the setting up of a committee. I was the one who suggested that the number should be 15, that the division should be 7-5, and with one representative for each of the three parties. It was my suggestion. I don't think, committee or no committee, a flag can be forced on the people by a simple majority. A flag must represent something of the views of Canadians as a whole, and cannot be something that is simply determined by a majority vote of a committee or a parliament when there was no mandate therefor. You know what the situation was. The Prime Minister during the election spoke of a distinctive flag. He didn't say by distinctive he meant to change the meaning given by Mr. Mackenzie King, the meaning given by Mr. Sanelraw, a flag upon which the Union Jack would occupy a place. After the election, he decided that distinctive meant that the Union Jack had to be removed. Now then, the committee's been set up. I'm not going to judge what the committee should do. I'm simply going to point out this fact, that any recommendation coming out of that committee that represents less than almost virtual unanimity will not be accepted by the Conservative Party, the opposition that stands alone for the preservation of those things that we have argued for during the weeks. However, I hope that the committee members will do so. But remember, last evening the Prime Minister said, we're going to have a flag by Christmas. We're going to have a flag with the maple leaf on it. That didn't look very much as if the 7 members appointed by the Liberal Party were going into that committee with an open mind. He's determined again the course that shall take place, the result that shall come out of that committee. That's not my understanding of the committee. I thought the committee was to be, as you said a moment ago, quoting my words, free and untrammeled. And yet last evening, again, we have another application of that principle. I want, said the Prime Minister in effect, a flag, and I'm going to get that flag by Christmas on which there'll be a maple leaf. Now, I've got no objection to maple leaf. I don't criticize it as a symbol of the country. It is a symbol of the country. But can you tell me any country in the world that ever put a symbol on its flag? What about, do we have the British lion on the Union Jack? Do you have the white rose of England on the Union Jack? Or do you have the eagle on the Stars and Stripes? Those are symbols. But a flag is something else. But I'm surprised that the Prime Minister should have said that last evening. I was very much taken aback by his suggestion that he's going to get his flag by Christmas. I've heard of prophecies like that before. It seems to represent, in his mind, the only objective and the only determination. And whatever the committee may do, he seems to know in advance exactly what the Liberal members would do. I would hope that when he spoke last evening, he didn't speak with any impressions or with coordination in his mind, for certainly such a view is contrary to my conception of the committee and of its duties and responsibilities.
Sir, I wonder if I could just pick up one of the points you've made, where you say that a flag cannot be decided by a majority. Now, purely as a matter of principle, if, say, a majority of 60% against a minority of 40% cannot decide that, isn't this the minority imposing its will on the majority?
Mr. Depoe, that's all right for matters of the economy and other matters of legislation. This is something that must be representative of all people. It's something that touches the heart. It's something that can't be imposed. Mr. King said in 1945 and 6, you can't put a flag on a people by the determination of a majority. It has to represent a consensus. 40% of the people of Canada, taking your figure, opposed to a flag would not bring about a flag that would be looked up to and honored. And I'm convinced as can be that that's so. You simply cannot impose the thing that represents your nation by a majority vote. And that's particularly so when the people have never had any opportunity to say that distinctive and a distinctive flag should remove therefrom the Union Jack, which has been with us as part of our flag throughout the period since 1867.
Well, I think, sir, we're dealing in parliamentary terms. The issue will be decided by Parliament. It's possible that no one really knows what the opinion of the country is on this matter. You've advocated a plebiscite. Last night, the Prime Minister suggested that you had reversed your field on this subject, that you had previously been against the principle of a plebiscite in our system.
Well, I was very interested in those that he quoted last night. He forgot to quote Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who advocated strongly that in a matter affecting the nation in 1917, there should be a plebiscite. He forgot to quote the fact that another great leader of liberalism, who stayed in office a long time. Mr. Mackenzie King had a plebiscite. He seems to have forgotten that the two great leaders of liberalism in this century both advocated a plebiscite. In other words, giving the people an opportunity to determine what they want. And I am more convinced than ever that if the attitude of the committee is to be that, the Liberal members of the committee, to be that, enunciated last evening by the Prime Minister, that the plebiscite is the only solution, giving the people a chance to vote. And in that plebiscite, and I pass this on as a thought, the young people in our country are the ones who will have to live under whatever flag is established. I would think that a plebiscite should certainly include all Canadians 18 years and over, so that the young people's viewpoint would be represented in any determination made by plebiscite.
In your opposition to the flag, would you go as far as to bring about general elections fought out on the flag issue? As a matter of fact, do you wish
I would
for
not
general
favor an
elections?
election on this. This is not the kind of issue upon which the Canadian people should make a determination. This is something that would arouse passions. I would have the plebiscite take place at the time of the next election. That would remove it from political considerations. We keep down the cost would be little or nothing. But I wouldn't want to see an election, because an election would simply divide still more the country that the Prime Minister, by his action, has divided to a degree that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And that's why, under no circumstances would I ask for, nor have I pressed in any way for an election. In fact, my attitude has throughout been that the people should have the right to determine this. We have no mandate and have had no mandate. And the fact that the Prime Minister has been able to secure, with one or two exceptions in each of the two parties, the NDP and the Social Credit, and the complete support of Mr. Cowett and his party, is not sufficient to convince me that those views represent the views of the people of Canada.
Sir, at the Conservative conference in Fredericton last week, the president of your National Party Association, Dalton Kemp, indicated that in his view, an election was in fact less likely now than it had been a little while ago. But what is the general state of readiness of your party if an election is called?
No party is ever ready for an election. Elections come and elections go. The opposition will always say that it was unprepared, that it was surprised. The only exception to that was in the 1963 election, when, as a result of a vote in the House, the Liberal Party received the support of Social Credit, and having received, and also the NDP, on a vote of non-confidence. With that exception, I don't know of any election throughout the years of my adult life where the opposition always has not stated that, well, it was taken greatly by surprise, irrespective of the strong stands that it had taken that brought about the election.
Would
you say, Mr. Diefenbaker, that your party is a truly democratic party in its leadership and its organization? Now, for instance, yourself, would you be ready to bring about a general convention of your party where the leadership of the party would be an issue?
You're asking whether or not we have a democratic organization. I don't know any party with a more democratic organization. From time to time, we've had conventions. We've had far too many conventions. As a matter of fact, for the choice of leaders, that has become almost a party disease over a period of years. However, the last election in which a leader was determined was in 1956. Since that, biannually, and on occasion annually, we've had an annual meeting, and the freest discussion is permitted. Last February, the whole question of leadership and policy was dealt with. There is nothing more important than an annual meeting to bring together the rank and file. The brass should not be determining policy, as was the criticism of the Liberal Party of itself in 1956 and 1957. The average man should have an opportunity we make provision for that by annual or meetings every 2 years, bringing together all Canadians from every part of the country so that in a community of discussion, we're able to arrive at policies to bring about the achievement of the purpose and objectives of the Conservative Party. One Canada, not two nations, as we hear advocated on occasion. One Canada, preserving the constitutional rights, maintaining those rights fully and forcibly, but assuring at the same time that the many other Canadians who belong, and I'm one of them in part, to an ethnic origin other than the British and the French, shall not be in Canada second-class citizens. That's our view. Equality in every way, and that's represented as well by our conventions held from time to time, or conferences is possibly the better expression, to enable Canadians as a whole supporting the Conservative Party to place their views before the country to the end that, if generally acceptable, consonant with national unity, changes can be made while not departing from the traditional policies that made this country possible under Macdonald and throughout the years has been followed by both parties.
Well, getting back for a moment to Fredericton, sir, and there's a cross-current here from the flag debate in which some of the Quebec members of your party spoke and voted in another way than that in which you spoke and voted. Professor W.L. Morton said at Fredericton that one of the main tasks of the Conservative Party must be to restore and rebuild its relationship with Quebec. What's your view on this? Is Quebec in a special situation, and is your party less in rapport with Quebec than some others?
Now, let me point out this fact. Possibly it isn't known. We have more members in Quebec today than we've had at any time, with one exception, in the present century. In 1911, there was an election. Quite a number were elected who subsequently supported Sir Robert Borden. But they opposed his naval policy and were elected mainly as nationalists. The one exception was 1930, when we elected some 24. But have you ever thought of the fact that in 1935, and I'm speaking now from recollection, we elected 5 from the province of Quebec. In 1940, we elected none, 1 independent. In 1945, I think we elected 2. 1949, we elected 2, and 1953, 4. We have more members today than we've had all through the years. And the reason that we have those members and that we were able to secure such strong support in Quebec